Thank you so much for coming to Long Branch tonight. I'm Kelly Patterson. I'm the executive director here. Thank you for making this a wonderful series of lectures this year in 2019. I want to thank Howard Meads, who's not here tonight, but who put this series together. Especially want to thank Sandy Lerner for being here tonight. And hopefully you'll take a look at the art by Brad Stevens that's up on the walls here and also in the West Wing Gallery. So I have a little introduction I'm going to read to you about Sandy. And we're just so delighted that you're here and very, very thankful that you're our big act for our series. No pressure at all. Sandy's a trailblazer and a true Renaissance woman. She's a global revolutionary who has made an impact in diverse industries from technology and cosmetics to the preservation of English literature and heritage breeds of livestock. With an astute pioneering instinct for innovative and successful business models, Lerner has shifted her focus to the development of humane, sustainable, and profitable farming practices at Irishire Farm in Upperville, Virginia. Throughout her many careers, Sandy's passion for farming remained constant, which led her to purchase Irishire Farm in Upperville, Virginia in 1996. Although the farm was in need of repair, it provided the perfect acreage, location, and layout for a sustainable and profit-driven operation. Today, the farm's mission is to preserve genetically viable heritage rare breeds of livestock to self-sufficiency and profitability through humane and sustainable farming practices. Irishire Farm was the first in Virginia to earn a designation of certified organic and certified humane operation. It is also certified predator-friendly. Lerner's choice to raise rare and endangered heritage breeds is an extension of her quest to help rebuild the local American agricultural infrastructure. We welcome Sandy Lerner.
I'm not invited to many places because I have a tendency to talk about very esoteric things. So what I decided today was I would just let you pick the esoteric thing. So what I thought I'd do instead of getting up and saying something is I just threw out some provocative topics. I like to have provocative topics. I'm kind of awkward that way. And you guys, it shouldn't take more than 5 minutes to go through these, and then I'll just answer questions or, clarification. And if not, I want to thank Cherie McDowell and her team for making the absolutely dynamite food. The meat comes from my farm, and we now have a couple of dozen partner farmers. Everything else we try to source locally and as organically as we possibly can, and I hope you enjoyed it. So, things you can ask me about, although they're neither inclusive nor exclusive. I've got a ratio that I use. This is not a graphic. I personally believe that food security is a ratio with food miles. I think the little blurb here said something about 1,500 miles. Depends on how you count it. I personally believe it's about twice that if you count the ingredients, not how far it came from Kellogg's or Cargill or wherever it was coming from, but where it came from there. And mind you, we don't count meat as an import in this country, and 80-odd% of the meat starts in Latin America. So I think that, yeah, about 80%. It's interesting. I've been having conversations with grocery stores about not buying Latin American meat, and it's to the point where they can't really have a conversation. It's very different. I had a lady say, "But your pigs are like really dirty." Yeah, they've been outside.
That's why they're called pigs.
Happy's a pig in mud, heard that one? We can talk about the myth of veganism. I am really tired of hearing people say, well, if everybody quit eating meat, we'd get rid of all of our global warming. Simply not true. Mother Nature put food animals on the planet for a reason, and I still don't know any vegan who is smarter than Mother Nature. farming in America, it is more dire than you can possibly imagine, unless you've been looking at it for the last 20 years like I have. It's also the only truly bipartisan issue. I have talked to every Democratic governor and indirectly every Republican governor since I've been here. Farming is still Virginia's #1 industry, and on a bipartisan basis, they have across the board refused to take any action whatsoever to do anything on the local, the state, or the national level. And we have Frank Perdue now as the Secretary of Agriculture. Lab-grown protein. I can talk about this. How many people remember Soylent Green? I call this Soylent Brown. Every bit of that protein has been lab-grown from one genetically modified cell strain. Every piece of meat that you put in your body has hundreds of different proteins in it. So you're going to eat this meat, it's going to have one protein, and nobody knows what your body is going to do for the other several hundred. Okay, but it tastes like meat, and that must mean that it's okay. Interesting looking at the advent of the genetically modified war, which I personally feel ought to be done by some business school, as the biggest failure in marketing of the last century. These guys just screwed it up, and they're very smart and they have like more money than God, right? But they really screwed it up. So now what they're doing, anybody seen the organic label? It's kind of a green thing and it's got like a bar across the top.
Yeah.
Not really inspiring from a graphic point of view or any other really. Look at our bioengineered labels with the happy sun. Yeah, that's gonna make everything all better. The destruction of rural America. I was really, really hopeful that Frank Perdue and I might have one common goal. And I can tell you right now, the destruction of rural America stops and starts with concentration banking capital. It's just it. You can blame Cargill. I love blaming Cargill. You can blame whomever you want to blame, but basically it started in the 60s as the banks started to concentrate, and it became a whole lot easier to build one multi-story, skyscraper in New York than make 10,000 loans for tractors. And if you have been through rural America and you've heard the things about the drug problems, it is all the same issue. There's no distinction there. And my family's from the Midwest, and every time I go back, I think, I can't feel any worse about this, and then I do. Loss of genetic diversity. All the Holstein cattle that are in commercial production come from 6.0 individuals. We lose a breed of domestic livestock worldwide every 2 weeks.
Ooh, wow.
When I started with my Shire horses in 1994, there were probably 1,500 of them. Now there are 800. At one point I had 8 Shire foals and I had 8% of the world production. There are 35,000 thoroughbred foals born in the US alone. And the genetic diversity, you think, okay, well, that's interesting. They obviously did this for a reason. Yes, profit. We won't get into the issue about the quality of the food, but as climate is changing, and I think this is probably an audience that is not going to have an issue with a statement, as climate is changing, those landrace breeds that can survive and thrive in odd microclimates will become more and more valuable. For the same reason that the frogs we're wiping out that can grow their limbs back, we are destroying so much on this planet without knowing it, and I can't stand here and say that we're not going to need it. Right now, the cattle that they're breeding, and I'm a cattle farmer, sorry, they have 10 times more milk than they need to raise a calf. They last 1.5 calves. They're in utter misery all the time. And then they get blamed for greenhouse gas. Is this blaming the victim? Thought I'd close with a few uplifting things. There are some places who get it right. In England, they don't have a Department of Agriculture. They now have Department of the Environment, Farming and Rural Affairs. Why? It's all the same thing. Okay, this is about 10 years old, so it's not particularly newsworthy, but I have taken this paradigm to every governor that I've been able to get in to see, and they all go, oh yeah, and then they do nothing. Okay, so farmers control the environment. Rural affairs are absolutely linked to the health of the agricultural economy and vice versa. When I grew up in our small town, there were a couple of feed shops, there was a couple of processors, there was a big freezer storage guy, there were people who put up hay and sold stuff to the feed. We had the most beautiful saddle shop. I just still think if I could get high on anything, I would walk back into Roper's saddle shop and smell that saddle shop. So when you look at what's happening in rural America, that symbiotic relationship with the farming and all of the amenities that people in thriving economic systems support, again, we're really talking about the same thing. In England, for example, you're paid not to farm marginal land. Okay, here we just throw more chemicals at it. And I will say, as I live in England part of the year, they have got a very, very vibrant rural community. They celebrate the rural communities. I could sit here and I could have a list going down to the floor in small type of awards and local shows and county shows where people show off their animals and their produce and their honey and their mead, their wine, all of this other stuff. Again, I've taken it to every governor I could get in to see. I don't tend to fund the Republicans, but I have a really good friend who's a really good Republican, and I kind of try to get in there, and she thinks I'm okay, and it doesn't work. But at any rate, I keep trying to get these things in between them. We no longer have a state fair in Virginia. It went out of business.
When did that go?
A couple years ago. Jay Adams was trying to get it back, and I actually solicited Kane and said, let's turn this into a really big showcase for local stuff, organic and everything. It didn't happen. We can talk about what makes a sustainable regenerative. That's the new word du jour. It's like the diet du jour. Okay, the word du jour, if you're not au fait in the farming community, is now regenerative. Call it whatever you want. We are a carbon sequestering operation, and that's because nothing is lost. And when you look at everything from the cattle on the ground, it goes around. This is regenerative, sustainable agriculture. By the way, I got tons of horns if anybody wants to work horns. They're absolutely gorgeous. I just went to the Horners Conference up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. I'm a Hornaby. I'm a Horner wannabe. At any rate, this is regenerative. And to prove how regenerative we are, we don't call the rendering plant. Our pet food is made from human-grade ingredients, and we send nothing to the renderer. So there's a link there if anybody wants to ask about that link. At any rate, it's how farming has been done for millennia. It's how God does farming. It's how people used to do farming before the Second World War and Monsanto and Bechtel. By the way, you guys all heard about Monsanto was acquired by Bayer? Total marriage made in hell. Bayer, the people who brought you Zyklon B used in the gas chambers of World War II. Monsanto's okay now. Corporate concentration in the meat industry. This is actually worse than it looks like. And the reason is that it used to be, when I got up here 15, 20 years ago, we'd do this talk about concentration in the meat industry and the Packer cartel. All four companies had at least started in the US. Now the biggest one is JBS out of Argentina. Wow. Girls are getting their periods at 5 in Latin America. It has to do with growth hormones. They are brought into this country, thank you Democrats, absolutely free of any tariff, thank you NAFTA. There are no environmental or safety controls, and what is the worst thing that happens? We passed in this country in 2006 country of origin labeling. Actually, 2002. By 2006, the National Animal Identification System was to be enacted into law. This was not an administrative regulation. This was passed by the US Congress. It was finally given the last bullet in its head by President Obama. We have no way to track these cattle. Why? We don't track imports of meat in the US. We track imports of seafood, but we don't track imports of meat. So all of these cattle are coming in. We have no ability to figure out where they're coming from. And I will tell you, we are so far from any kind of identification scheme. Anybody know what lot tracking is? Well, if you care, ask me later. And that's kind of about it. So you guys can just go and ask me whatever it is that you think is interesting.
I saw with the first one that opened the festival, was it the Big Little Farm? And it's an operation out in California. And the movie's amazing. They're doing exactly what you're talking about. Obviously on not the kind of scale that will sustain America, but probably 250, and they raised everything, but it all works. The ducks ended up getting rid of the snails that were in the fruit trees, and they've just figured it out, and they've got everything. And it all works together.
God's good that way.
So if anybody can see that movie, I highly recommend it.
What's it called again?
The Big Little Farm. It's a documentary.
Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk a little bit about the facility you bought in Frederick County to process meat?
Sure. It took me 10 years to buy a slaughterhouse. It was owned by Mr. DeHavens, and we've renovated. It is now organic, USDA, and humane certified. We are looking at building a much larger facility someplace else, but for right now we figure we can probably do about 100 head of large animals a week. Did I answer your question? And we are certainly open to the public. We're open to the public, do custom cuts, and you will not find better butchers anywhere. I guarantee you that. Yes, sir.
Thank you for your talk. It was quite interesting, even brief. What would a price on carbon do to all this stuff you talk about?
I'm not really sure I'm qualified to answer that, but places where carbon credits have been tried and were managed apolitically, it seems to have been very successful. And other models, such as wet stream credits, seem to be quite successful. I think we need to do everything and anything. Yes, ma'am.
Could you talk a little bit about what you think the ramifications would be for 3D printing of meat?
Yeah, I think I sort of did. 3D printing of meat really just means lab cultured, single strain, genetically modified protein that's made into an appetizing shape. That's all it is. And it has to be genetically modified because there is no cell strain that without genetic modification will grow quickly enough to be commercially viable. And as I've mentioned before, when you eat a piece of meat, you're eating, I don't want to get too graphic here, but when you start from those stem cells and the animal differentiates, it differentiates into blood and blood vessels and how many different kinds of muscles and tendons and other kinds of proteins, and you're talking about one. Well, we've got at least 4 million years, it seems 9 million, 12 million, whatever, eating these kind of kitchen soup proteins that I think that not only our endocrine system requires, but everything that we do, and people forget about the nematodes. Don't get me started on nematodes. The nematodes need all of these proteins. So again, this is the myth of veganism, that somehow if you remove all the grazing animals, there used to be like 9 million buffalo on the Great Plains. God put those animals. All of those things from the ground down require not only the excrement, but also the decaying flesh and the proteins and the calciums and the minerals. If you take all of that away, what are you left with? Petrochemical fertilizer. Okay? So there's no get out of free jail-free card here. But on the meat protein thing, they're not required to test what happens to our bodies when you derive your protein from a single source, let alone a single source protein that doesn't occur in nature. And I think it will not have a happy surprise, okay? And they don't care. They will get your money.
Who buys it to sustain the market for that?
It's doing very well, actually. And
It
interesting.
sounds so gross. Who buys? I mean,
Interesting thing. Do you know who some of the biggest investors in that the Soylent Brown are? The Packer cartel.
Really?
Packer cartel. Yes, I had a question over here somewhere.
Oh, well, I had a
Yes, ma'am.
question that sort of, I wanted you to elaborate a little bit on that earlier thing that you mentioned, that, you know, vegans think that a world without any kind of cattle or sheep or, my son is not a vegan, but he's a vegetarian, and he says we just shouldn't eat any meat at all, and I'd like to have a better argument against
Well, I can think of a couple. One is that those animals have been here a lot longer than we have, and if you believe in evolution, well, actually, if you don't, I have nothing to say. If you believe in evolution, you have to believe that the micro and macroorganisms on this planet are evolved to thrive in roughly the proportions that they existed before we started really screwing things up, which probably started with fire. Okay, that was just really a bad idea. So that's one of it. And again, if you don't have that it's called hot in the composting world, that hot matter, which is decaying flesh, to put back into that nutritive system that starts at the ground level with the things under the ground. They always say that healthy soil has biomass, more livestock under it than above it. And I believe that. You're going to end up with petrochemical fertilizers, and we all know where that goes. The second thing is we got these teeth here. You know, they're called canine teeth, and we kind of hung out during the last ice age because we ate critters when there wasn't really a whole lot of tomatoes and lettuce and kale and other things that are eating. With the climate bouncing the way that it is, I personally want to keep my digestive system able to be as omnivorous as it possibly can be. So I think those are two pretty good reasons. And I think another one is that, yes, you can get your protein somewhere else, but the way that Mother Nature has constructed us, meat is a complete protein, milk is a complete protein. You can get complete proteins in small amounts from other foods, and you can mix foods to get complete protein. But it's pretty hard, it requires a lot of calculation, and secondly, nobody's thinking about the amount of ground that you are taking up, growing up all of those plants, back to your chemical fertilizer thing, to get all of that protein when you could just eat the meat and the milk and the eggs. So I think it's a very tunnel vision argument by people who want to make a point, and certainly not by people who have had to live on the land and understand the land and manage the land in a way that they can continue to live on it for generations, which is, I always, for the shorthand way, say the way my grandfather used to farm. I'm a Dust Bowl baby here. Well, my parents were, let's put it that way. So that's my argument about veganism. Vegetarianism, if you're going to drink milk and eat eggs, that gets a little bit washed out, and then I have to say, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? I was a vegetarian for 30 years. It was not for health reasons. It was because I was not going to. I got out of high school and went into college, and I found out about factory farming, and I just was not going to give them any of my money. I didn't have very much, and they weren't going to get any of it. So does that help?
Yeah, that helps. I mean, the other argument is the polluting things that it takes to feed every beef cattle
Oil,
is.
they say, oil.
You have to separate the method of farming from the farming. I would be the first person to agree that concentrated feed operations, better known as factory farms, are not a good idea for anybody, including the animals that are there. We are net carbon sequesters. We are net compost exporters. And I think that's just a part of that big circle thing. You know, again, if you don't get it that way, you're going to have to get it out of an oil barrel. The Marcuses are going to have to pick one of them.
You go ahead. Well, I'll go ahead. If 80% of our meat comes from South America, what happens to the meat that's grown in the United States? Do we not have enough to feed our people, or what's happening with the meat?
I didn't plant her. There used to be 400 dairies in Loudoun County, and now there's one. The average age of a farmer is almost 70. 14% of farmers are below the poverty line. And I will tell you that having to put up with, and I don't say this in a bad way, I voluntarily fenced my creeks off for riparian buffers. I believe in sustainability. I am just a caretaker here. Okay, somebody is going to have my farm after me, and it's going to be better than when I inherited it, which is a pretty low bar. But I'm trying to raise it up above that one. You see what's happening. A really chilling statistic. In 1800, England used to be called a nation of shopkeepers. We were called a nation of farmers. 1800, 98% of Americans were engaged in either farming directly or an agribusiness-related occupation, you know, such as selling feed or selling harnesses or, you know, shoeing horses or something. Anybody want to guess what it was in 1900? Half. 45%, 1900. Anybody want to guess what it is now? It's less than 2%. We don't even qualify on the census anymore. That goes back to that food miles and food security. And an interesting thing, since I can give you guys some good news, I talked to the person who provided meat to Costco, did all the private labeling, you know, that Kirkland stuff. They get really good meat at Costco, at least it looks good. Depends on if you have a problem with too much diethylstilbestrol in your diet and the fact that it leads to brain tumor and aggression. He says that he figured 7% of the meat that was sold in Costco came from American farms. And I'm going back probably about 10 years. And I can tell you it has not improved. Has not improved. When I go to the Costco in England, there's a sign above the meat case that says 100% British beef. 100% British beef. Why? Country of origin labeling, lot tracking. And on every package, it says where it came from down to the farmer's name. You know, I come from a long line of people in small businesses. If you won't put your name on your product, you shouldn't be in business. I want my name on everything. Do you know it's illegal to lot track? Somebody has to ask about lot tracking, because other than that, I'm not going to talk about it. Do you want to hear about that, or somebody in the back want a question?
Lot tracking.
Lot tracking.
Tell us about that.
In 2002, we were supposed to have country of origin labeling. And it was, as I said, it was enacted by Congress. It was a law. The meat packer cartel has been up in front every year of the Department of Justice for price fixing. Talk to the people at the DOJ. I gave a talk about this at Cosmos Club once. And they said, yeah, we know who you're talking about. And, you know, they just pay the fine. It's cheaper and they make all this money. And so guess what happened to country of origin labeling, back to that other thing about that meat coming from Latin America, okay? 2006, we were supposed to have the National Animal Identification System, NAIS. It's really kind of like an Ethernet address. It had the farm number. We were one of like the first 10 people to get like an NAS farm number. And then the next part of it is a unique ID to that animal's ear tag. Or in the case of chickens and turkeys, it's a flock. In the case of pigs, it's a litter. And in the case of sheep, I think it's a flock. I'm not sure if sheep is I don't do sheep, was individual or not. And that had to be carried for the lifetime of the animal all the way through to the point of sale. Okay? And you go, oh my God, how can you do that? Europe has been doing it, and Japan since 1995. They BSE test and lot track 100% of the beef that goes through there. And every single solitary chicken, turkey, you name it, is lot tracked to the flock. So it's very possible, unless you think the Europeans and the Japanese are like totally nuts. There have been, every year, there are cases of BSE discovered in this country. We blame the Canadians. Of course, it's that balance of trade thing. It was finally put out of its misery by Barack Obama. This is a law that was passed by Congress requiring this to be done for the American consumer, and it just went away. I lot track my cattle. You get a register receipt at my store, it has an ear tag number on it. And I've been doing it since 2004, and it is illegal.
It's illegal.
It is illegal.
Scrappy tag itself is put on to show, so they can trace it back?
You don't have to have it to the point of sale, and you don't have to have it, if you think about it, you cut up one of those animals, it's really a big hierarchical bill of materials problem, because you have to be able to recreate the entire animal based on where it went. And we do it to the final point of sale, either the restaurant or the purchaser or whatever. And the take-home thing is, that's illegal. South Dakota started to do it, and regardless, and Colorado started to do it. The USDA threatened to sue Colorado. Colorado backed down. South Dakota doesn't tell anybody. My family's from South Dakota. The next thing I'm going to get arrested for is BSE testing. I haven't figured out how it is illegal to BSE test my cattle. Why? With traceability goes liability. The average hamburger contains about 1,100 sources of protein. Go. Anybody want to guess the combinatorics on that one? It's 2 to the 1100th minus 1. I don't know if you pay attention to these huge recalls that are coming out now. $250,000. JBS got hit with a $250 million recall. At some point, it will become cheaper merely to track. And then the courts will get a hold of it, and then it won't. So when you want to talk about a problem with the food system, there's a good one. And it's related to this, in that those people who are no longer farming have given up their businesses to the Packer cartel, who own all of the slaughterhouses, who provide all of the beef coming in from Latin America. Latin America, usually what they'll do is they'll bring them up as feeder cattle, and then they're fed out in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, you name it. And my family had a homestead in Nebraska, and in the nearest big town, they have a slaughterhouse that processes 5,000 animals a day. And that's not a big one. The big ones do 20,000 a day. Can you imagine the revenue from the rendering plant there?
And the atrocity.
Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of slaughtering, the facility that you have now, you said local farmers can come with their cattle. Does the cattle have to be certified organic in order to go through?
No. The question is by the way, I have an interest in this. I've declared this, so it's now no longer a conflict of interest. No, what we do is we process organic first because we clean, and you have to clean to an organic standard, and then things that are not organic are processed after the organic animals have gone through, and we are certified humane. Yes, ma'am.
I saw on 60 Minutes that there's an initiative in Kentucky to build huge greenhouses. And the way that they got the funding was to show that they can get product to 70% of America in 2, maybe 3 days. Whereas most of the food that we get at the local grocery stores it's about 14 to 21 days old by the time it even gets here. So I was wondering, what do you think it would take for the culture of America to adopt that as a viable plan for us and get our food source in America rather than importing so much from overseas?
Well, I think you're talking about produce, first of all. Secondly, I would not consider that in any way, shape, or form a viable plan.
No.
Well, think about it. It's just a matter of time before the communications network is taken down by a terrorist attack. Parts of it have been. Parts of it are under attack consistently. There are 3 countries in the world who really do very little else other than attack that. It amazes me that they haven't pulled down the transportation system. But imagine you have that providing all of the U.S., and all of a sudden there is no internet. Imagine with a centralized food system, and this is where I'm going with that. I think that where we have to be moving is to an extremely localized food system to get the food to people very quickly, because it doesn't have to travel very far. And everybody else knows in every other system the way that you build in security is redundancy. So to have a unique facility like that if I were a terrorist, I'd take it out. And then what would you do to it? You guys all go to airports. You've seen that the DOD has got airplanes everywhere. You know, you kind of look even in these small sort of little one-horse outfits, and you see like they got a couple of bombers, or they got a couple of C-130s, just sort of sitting there. They got the idea about redundancy, all right? And what we need to do is build back that redundancy and that depth and that localization of the food system, in my view, not the other way around. Because if the communication goes down, I don't want to be living in the city. How are we going to get food to New York and Washington, D.C. and Baltimore and all of those other places without a way to control the trucks?
But how are we going to get it back to 1900 level?
Well, I don't know that we have to get it to 1900. I'd be really happy with like 1940. Buy local. That's easy. Just buy local. And if you buy it, we're in a capitalist economy. If you buy it and you ask for it, it will be here. And if you rely on food, I see very little difference in buying food from Mexico or buying all of my produce from Kentucky. It's still a single source of failure. And secondly, really we're talking about seasonality. We also need to eat seasonally to reduce the food miles, to reduce the chemical inputs, and all of the other inputs that go on to providing strawberries in January. All right, so I think to me, it's in a way, in my thinking, it's a solution looking for a problem, but there is a problem, and it's not that solution. Yes, ma'am.
It seems like whenever I drive around here and anywhere in Virginia where I am, that when I see farming going on, it's usually corn or soybeans, and it's usually farmers who are using Roundup and fields that once the corn or the soybean is gone for the season, all you see coming back is sort of, very limited weeds and stuff. And I guess I see your picture of the way things are done at Ayrshire, which seems to be unbelievable. From a practical perspective, for people who maybe don't have the resources or the time to do this, who want to do things to support local farmers, it just seems like most of what you see happening is through chemicals and through, stuff like that maybe doesn't fit anywhere into this. And I just wondered what your thoughts were with regard to what makes sense for people in this area.
Well, I'll tell you where the corn and the soybeans come from. Virginia beef. Virginia beef is the largest privately held recipient of farm subsidy in the state of Virginia. They don't keep any permanent cattle operation. They buy in heifers because they're 10 cents a pound cheaper. and they grow them out, and then they send them to be fed out. And then after that happens, they'll go and they'll farm the corn and the soybeans, which is, as you point out, not done in any regenerative way. But the reason is that's where their subsidies come from. Then what happens is that after the corn has taken all the nutrients out of the topsoil, then they do sod farming. And it's okay to do sod farming where there's no topsoil because they just bring it in and they kill everything and they put all that other stuff on it. And then you see the subdivision. So Bill Brockett has made a really, really good living. And he won since I've been here, he's won the top Virginia Agricultural Award for this kind of mechanism that really depends on the rapidly encroaching suburban sprawl. So that's where you're seeing the corn and the soybeans, and it's almost all. Last I heard, he had in excess of 50,000 acres under cultivation, and that's not counting the pasture rents, where he's still got the cattle. So my feeling is that if you go and you look in this area, unlike Nome or other places, we're not where we are. We're not where Britain is. I have 5 farmers markets within 10 miles of me in Britain, right? But you've got a number of places, the small stores, my place, that sell local, and if you look for it, you can buy it. It takes a little bit more time to look at it. And here's something to think about. Everybody here would be really offended if I said something about you don't really care who you sleep with, right? Everybody's like pretty particular about that. That's a big thing, you know. You have a lot of personal interest in that, but you will put the food into your body, and you don't know where it's been. I just want to know where my food's been. I want to know what they've put on it. I want to know where they've hauled it from. Do I have a little bit of restricted diet? We have some really, 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 really good hoop house greens growers in this area. And we also can get some good tomatoes. They're starting to put in we lost one, but starting to put in another tomato place. I think those sorts of local, and back to the question about getting everything from Kentucky or wherever it was, those sorts of local enterprises are something that you vote here with your wallet. And if you want it, if you want to go into the grocery store and you want to pick it all up in a shopping cart, and you want to go out and pay a bill, by the way, that's exactly how the grocery stores buy their food. I can tell you trying to deal with it. Then you're not supporting that sort of thing. So I think, yes, everybody has limited time. Most people have limited money. I personally put food in my body as a pretty darn important thing, right up there with who I decide to sleep with. Yes, sir. That's my cousin. We're adopted cousins.
When I ask it as a whole Democrat question, what about people who live at the poverty line? How are they going to improve their diets?
People at the poverty line, how they improve their diets. I have 2 answers for that. One, are you talking about rural people or are you talking about urban people? Because the rural people are probably the people who still know how to grow food. And interestingly, do you know who is funding the farm to school and the farm to government and the farm to hospital programs throughout the South? In exactly those depressed rural organizations. Does anybody have any idea who the big funder is? It is going to knock your socks off.
George Soros.
He doesn't have that kind of money. The same people who brought you the internet, the same people who really, really care about your national security, care about your food security, because frankly they're the same thing, and it's the DOD. And I have been in front of, General Furry Eyebrows, I don't know how many times, and I have never once been harassed on a sexual level or talked down to or anything else. They were so happy to have somebody who just wouldn't bullshit them. And those are the people, think about where we'd be as a country, by the way, if we didn't have an internet today. Those are the people who in 1965 started the internet. Those are the people who are funding the local programs, farm to school, farm to hospital, farm to government. So it must be important. Yes, ma'am.
What about the agricultural extension agents in the state? Are they doing anything to help with your ideas here?
You've hit a nerve. This was on my manifesto that I wrote in 2004 to give to Tim Kaine. Everybody know what agricultural extension agents are? Yeah. Okay. You know that they're part of the land grant legislation that was passed, I think it was in the late 1800s. They are supposed to promulgate the research that's being done at those land grant institutions out into the countryside to those farmers and bring the latest and greatest ideas and help you with your problems. I've got, tall fescue or whatever. In Virginia, that's all handled by Blacksburg, and they have no organic classes whatsoever at Blacksburg. We tried to buy sheep from our extension agent in Loudoun County, but they were inedible. And frankly, that system, like a lot of the programs such as Farm Aid and the program that gets young people with together with people who have land, are just in this state they're moribund. I could give you a longer explanation. They talk to themselves. If I want something from an extension agency, I go to West Virginia. West Virginia is about 30 years ahead of Virginia. Wow. And North Carolina is farther ahead than that. How many Virginians? Never mind. So it's really useless. And if you call them, when I was a kid, our extension agent would come and have coffee with my uncle. He'd sit there and they'd talk about weeds and they'd talk about rainfall and they'd talk about all this other stuff. And he'd show up about every 2-3 weeks, ask, about this prices and that prices and, hey, where'd you get your new truck or whatever. And I went to 4-H with his kids. There's no 4-H in Loudoun County anymore. Oh, about 5 years ago, they deleted the last agricultural training class in the county. Where am I supposed to get people who know how to work? Yeah. I can tell you where I get them.
West Virginia.
Nope.
Clark County.
South of the border, estimated more than 90% of workers on farms are illegal aliens. And that's another thing that's really stupid. When I was growing up on a farm, before the pear blight hit and took out our 108 acres of monoculture pears, we had the Prosecco program. And my folks had to sponsor these people. They came up and that was just because I was young enough that we couldn't get enough college students. People in my grandmother's generation used to go to California to pick fruit in their summer vacation to earn money. I had a great aunt who actually did that, met her husband that way. We had the Prosecco program, and so my folks would sponsor them. We had to have places for them to live and everything, and then they would make all the money, and then they would go home, and everybody was happy. But of course, people abused that system terribly, and a man named Cesar Chavez got involved, and with the result that instead of cleaning it up and making it viable, they simply deleted it. So now we're in the fortunate situation that we are today. Did I answer whatever that question was? I think I've meandered.
Auburn, Alabama, which had API to start with before Auburn University, and lived right across from where they had big rails, where they had machinery that went and they planted things between the rails and everything. It was very interesting. And your friends that were agricultural extension people that taught there and everything, they thought it was very interesting. And it seemed like that would be the best way to disseminate all of this information very quickly.
It would be if the main problem, I don't think I addressed with that. Who do you think pays for the labs at those land grant agricultural colleges? Okay. And those people are sent out by Monsanto and Purina and the Mars Company and all of those others, and they have one particular view. And if you are not farming in that particular view, they don't really have a lot to say to you. And South Dakota is the only place I know that has an organic FFA. Wow. Yes, ma'am. Anybody? Yes, ma'am.
If there were sympathetic legislators who have very little time and very little knowledge.
I would know them, and I would talk about them.
Well, I guess my question is, how do we I'm going to use the obnoxious word wave. I mean, are there organizations and people, you're a wonderful resource, but I need more than one.
With respect to with respect to Virginia, the problem is that in the first place, agriculture is the #1 revenue stream. Now, in business, if you had a CEO that neglected its flagship product, he'd probably be in an employment line. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in government. And as I said, this is truly a bipartisan effort to kill Virginia. And what they do is they look at VDACs as their bank account for staff positions. When I came to Virginia, VDACs had 750 people. Now it's got a couple hundred. And so what they do in every budget is they just keep excising the budget out of VDACs. So I would say to my legislature, the first thing you have to do is resuscitate VDACs. The second thing is that I personally feel Virginia is also guilty of undue delegation in that the Farm Bureau actually runs the Farm Link program, which was a federal program that matched, it's going back to the 30s, matched young people who did not have capital with landowners on a kind of a subsidized basis. So the landowner would, basically get a tax subsidy and the young person would have land to farm, which they would not be able to. This has been delegated in Virginia for decades to the Farm Bureau, which interesting is not are not farmers, they are insurance salesmen, and they're old ones at that. And the third thing has to do with what we were just talking about, which is the Extension Service has got to be absolutely just picked up, buried, and restarted. And I can't even get a governor who understands what the Extension Service is. And I think I gave you a copy of my 2004 7-page manifesto. All of those things are possible. I think you just got to pick your target. Yes, sir.
I recall either last year or the year before listening to an NPR program about your farm. As I recall, they said that the turkeys at Thanksgiving were about $200. Aside from substantially increasing volume, do you envision any other cost centers that you can reduce so that the average person can afford one of those turkeys?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know you, but I thank you for asking it. What's a cost, all right? If you think about a cost, and I'm a frustrated economist from another life, we really subsidize food prices because we pay to clean up the environmental damage. We pay to clean up the air. We pay to clean up the waterways. We subsidize, we build all of the roads. We build the communications infrastructures. And then all the companies who go to use that and move that food all those miles, they take advantage of that and they make money. And if you look here, this is cost of meat and this is farm gate revenue. All right, cost of meat has gone up about 30%. Farm gate revenue actually in Virginia has declined about 9%. So my answer to you is yes, the more people who buy organic, our big cost is feed. Okay, it pretty much divides itself about half feed, about half labor. Labor scales, you can get an economy of scale going with labor. I could raise 3,000 chickens with the same number of people that I can raise 6,000 chickens or turkeys or whatever. What doesn't scale is the feed. The more people who buy organic, the cheaper the feed gets. Every year we inch up with more and more of these acres locally, meaning Pennsylvania, who have organic feed, which is bringing the price down. But the big thing that I guess I would say in answer to your question is we need a wiser and more parsimonious concept of meat. Instead of the 22-ounce steak, if you go to Europe, you get a beautiful little steak that's about this big. It might be 3 or 4 ounces, but it's perfect. And if you take the cost of my turkeys and you figure how many of those modest but healthful portions could come out of that turkey, I think you'd find that it's very affordable. Now, you could do the same thing with an 89-cent butterball if you wanted to eat that stuff. But remember that when you are eating the butterball, you are also, as a consumer, paying for things I didn't mention as well, such as the impact on health and the loss to the economy due to environmental illnesses that have to do with these concentrated feeding operations. If they had to pay their full share, there would be a pretty significantly smaller discrepancy in the price. So I would say, as with any new technology, if you bought a cell phone in the 1980s, they were about this big and they cost a whole lot of money. I bought Apple's first luggable computer, which weighed 17 pounds, and I think I paid $5,000 in the early 80s for it. Okay? People who are going to support new ideas usually bear an unfair share of the burden economically, socially, politically, but that's why we're here. I want to get somebody who hasn't had a question. Anybody else? Somebody who yes, ma'am.
You were talking about, or one of your slides addressed the dying rural areas, and you touched on a discussion that you had with Tim Kaine about, well, say, for example, the state fair. But what other things, if you could wave a magic wand, would you do? Would you ask at least the state legislators to address in terms of rural America?
You know, it sounds really corny, but I do live part of the year in Britain, and I will tell you that this works. When you go into the grocery store, and I'm talking like the equivalent of their Safeway, everything grown in Britain, like their corn or their tomatoes, has a label on it that says, this comes from Fred Schmertz's farm in Gloucestershire. And it's wrapped up in a big red, white, and blue Union Jack, like kind of plastic thing. And every weekend, there are things that celebrate, and I'll just use the Clark County Fair, which is a great fair. It's hanging in there. Imagine a Clark County Fair on steroids, and you could go to one a month and one a week during the growing season. They have wine festivals and they have awards. Okay, people are nuts about awards. All right, they have awards. Every tiny little town has an award for the best local producer and the restaurant that uses the most local things, and the best buy British or whatever. And by the way, I gave Tim Kaine 4 file boxes that big of things I had collected tediously to show what is possible at the local level. And the cool thing is, it's at the local level. All you have to do is start these contests and people will come. Do that in England. The guys do all the gardening. They have onions that are this big. They have these contests for like the most obscene looking vegetables. They have more prizes and more festivals and more fairs. If you are a kid in Britain, I want to tell you, do you know that in Britain, what the most #1 popular television program is for children? Tractor Ted. You can do this. You can do this. It just, again, back to, do you want everything grown in, Kentucky, or do you, what do you want to do? You can just start one of these things. Have a jam making fair, or, a quilt show. And, the story behind England is interesting to me, because I was living there in 1995 when it started. What happened? 1995, everybody says BSE, BSE. No, it really had nothing to do with BSE. It had to do with the fact that the EU wanted Britain to cave in over a reduced work week. I think at that point they wanted to go to like 34 hours. Now they're at 32 hours a week. And a higher minimum wage law. And Britain said, we have an unemployment problem, especially in our cities and our north. We can't do this. We're not going to do it. So cows have BSE. Cows had BSE for a long time. It's not a new disease. Anybody who's studied prions knows this. And all of a sudden, the EU completely stopped buying anything from England in terms of agricultural products. And the Brits, God bless their little pointed heads, who had been through the Second World War and understood what happens when you do not have a food supply local to your country. And you have to go on, there's food rationing in England, 1960s. Mm-hmm. We don't know any of this stuff. So they said, well, hell, okay, let's grow our own food. And they basically levered it all up from the, garden, victory through gardens things, started all of these, gave DEFRA, which at that point was MAF, a lot of money to rebuild local slaughterhouses, local processing plants, local smoking plants, local freezer storage, and all of this stuff. And how many years are we now from 1995? 25 something years? I got to tell you, Britain has some of the best food in the world, and it's fresh, and I know where it's from. And this is going to the equivalent of their Safeway. It's got the farmer's name on the box. And every single solitary piece of meat has been tested for BSE, if it's cattle. It's all been tested for scraping and all the rest of that stuff, and it's all been lot tracked, and they can recall anything down to an animal. It is possible to do that, and furthermore, I will tell you, we don't know how much money we have here. Back to the idea about money. In England, I take some of my people back there now and again. The holes in the walls that they make their food in, and the tiny little spaces, and the lack of capital equipment, and the lack of just money, and people are living. This is England. I'm not talking about, deepest, darkest Africa or someplace in the East. I'm talking about England. They could do it. We have got a standard of living that is, I don't know how many times, 10 times theirs. I mean, it's a lot. If they can do it, can we not? What about them is different from us? It's not the language. Okay. They have the EU under them, kind of pissing on their shoes, and we've got the cartel pissing on our shoes and the government. But we can do it if the people want it. And I'll tell you another statistic. In 2002, the National Organic Program was finally enacted into law. We were the last first world country to do this by a long shot. We are still the only first world country that does not have any humane standards attached to the organic standard. They were recently, last year, killed by the Secretary of Agriculture. I wonder why. In that battle, and I watched that very, very closely because I was certified organic by Virginia before the NOP in 2002. I was certified since 1999 in Virginia. I had to wait 3 years because they dumped everything conceivable on the ground in my farm. 220,000 people wrote in from the U.S. on those National Organic Program request for comment. That is by far the largest that had ever at that time. I don't know if there's something since had ever happened. And you guys saved the NOP, the American citizen. Why? Tyson's was right out there. Oh, you don't have to feed chickens organic food. We can just call them chicken, right? Beef people. There's nothing inorganic about growth hormones. Everybody has growth hormones. I mean, I will tell you, it was getting absolutely hammered, and the U.S. consumer saved it. It kind of ended up in this really freaky kind of marriage made in hell that is probably not any good for anybody, but at least it's organic. At least you can believe it. I can't use GMO. I can't use artificial growth stimulants. I can't use herbicides, pesticides, and all the rest of that stuff. At least it's organic. Are we way behind Europe? Yeah, probably 30 years. But at least we got it, and we got it because of you. It wasn't the small farmers. Believe me, there's not enough of us. I don't think there's 220,000 of us left. There's very few people. So we can do this. It just takes everybody. I'm gonna do pies. I'm gonna have an egg contest. I just went someplace in England and they actually had an egg contest. I had no idea what the different ones that won were. One of the most coolest things I've ever done in my life was go to a chicken show. I don't like chickens. Okay, we process 20,000 a month, but I don't like chickens particularly. And I went to a chicken show, and there are chickens that are adults like that, and there are chickens that are like this, and they're like every color in the world. Raise some chickens. Just become a part of the food system. Take kids and show them how to plant. Okay, try to get some sort of community garden going. There's money for all this stuff. There really, really and truly is. And that's one of the things I think that Virginia falls very, very behind on, is it doesn't have the programs to even ask for the money. There's simply a lack of will. As long as you have the Farm Bureau deciding who runs agriculture in Virginia, we're going to be sliding down the trailing edge. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Could you explain about your processing plant, what is humanely documented about it?
This is a good question. If you're going to slaughter something, how the hell is that humane? A woman started about 20, 25 years ago, I'm sure you've heard her, Temple Grandin. And she had one good idea. And that is that if you're going to, and every deer hunter knows this, if you're going to kill something with a view to eating it, don't stress it out first. And animals are not that complicated. They're not like people. They don't dissemble. They don't deceive. They don't have another agenda. Okay, they're just busy being cows or pigs or whatever. To be humane, our processing facility must conform to specifics, but here are the general guidelines. The animals can't see another animal being killed. They have to be kept in the dark prior to slaughter and during slaughter, because animals are much closer to that sort of diurnal thing. When you put an animal in the dark, they kind of calm down. We have to use very low voices. For the chickens, we have to use a special knife that actually stuns them before their throat is cut. Unlike the packer plants, which usually deprive the animals of food and water for about 48 hours before they go in, we have to have food and water available to the animals up till the point of slaughter. Specific things, corners don't occur in nature. Nature has bends. So all of the pens, as they go into the slaughter facility, must be rounded so that they're not put in this kind of, sort of, oh crap, I'm at a dead end here, sort of thing, and faced by all. It's just a very gentle weaving things. One of these days, we will get to where the Europeans are, and we will actually gas our animals to death with carbon dioxide. They've finally allowed one pork producer to now do that. Nobody's asked me about gene pool. Since our pigs are not hybridized not to have bone, because that's a waste product, they have very thick skulls, and we actually had to prove that we were using a bolt that would kill that pig in one shot. So it's a very pervasive set of instructions, and it's basically the animal is comfortable and not freaked out, and then it's dead. And like everybody says, it has one bad day. Ours doesn't even have a bad minute. Okay, they're just there. They're with all their friends. They're moved as a group. They're kept as a cohort. They were just chowing down at one of the farms, and all of a sudden they're standing in line like they do all the time to get weighed or whatever, and Bob's your uncle. And interestingly, Temple Grandin has had the effect that she's had because it improves meat quality. Everybody knows if you shoot a deer and you wound it and you go try to eat it, it's like adrenaline drenched and it tastes really bad and like all the muscles are seized and everything. The Packer cartel got the idea, shit, if we did this, we wouldn't be throwing away all these dark cutters. Yeah. So, it's every once in a while there's just some good news, and I think that's one of them. Yes, ma'am.
Why did Gentle Harvest not open in Winchester?
Why did Gentle Harvest not open in Winchester? Between the architect and the county and somebody on the board of supervisors who said that they didn't want their daughter watching a man wash his hands after he used the restroom, and the construction costs were about $3 million. And there was just no way, a food store operates on a 2 to 3% margin, even an organic one. It just financially made no sense. And the more that we got into it, and we had issues with the access, and VDOT, and then they're going to put a big interchange over that. They're going to have like this big multi-story interchange. And nobody would tell us what kind of complex polytetrahedron our driveway would turn into. And finally, the numbers kept going ka-ching, 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 and I'm over here and I'm thinking, I can't do this. I would really, really like to find a smaller property. But the big killer to people in my business is you have to have business every hour you're open. And it's very hard to find an area in Winchester that will not have business at lunch and at dinner time. And in the meantime,
I thought the university would solve that problem.
University kids eat organic. They're great, and they drink kale juice for breakfast. I really don't understand that. But there's just not enough of them all the time to keep that store in business, a market of that size in business. And I have found that in Marshall. We are right off of 66, and there are housing developments up the armpit, and we are losing money in that store significantly. The line is trending in the right direction. It's still bleeding red, and I doubt I will live long enough to see it change color. So it just got to the point where, back to supporting local businesses, if you want the amenity, you have to be prepared at this point to pay for it and to patronize it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about Costco that you've mentioned a few times. They have a ton of organic products. So where do you draw the line? I mean, some small local farms may not be able to conform to all of the organic requirements, but would it be better to eat that from a local farmer that are, sensible and making good choices, as opposed to buying products that are organic from Costco?
That's a really good question. I kind of compare it to the Protestant Catholic debate. In the first place, the idea that a local farmer can't afford to go organic, I would actually make the opposite argument. They can't afford not to go organic, because there's a huge price premium, as we've discussed, for being organic, plus the fact that in Virginia, our labor costs and our land costs are so high. We can't really compete with, the big grain producers and, the huge agribusiness that's out in the Midwest and all that flat land. So we really, and I've been telling the governor this for a long time, at least anybody who would talk to me, what we really need to do in Virginia is support niche agriculture that can really leverage on our, nice big communities that are right down the road, and have people collectively rebuilding that food system. Back to your question, is it better to buy local or is it better to buy organic? First of all, Costco organic and Walmart organic is all coming from another country. So you are looking at believing their certifications, which their certifications are a political thing, and our accepting their certifications are a political thing. Because if we started turning down all of the Chinese food imports, there would be a big political issue, and a lot of people don't want to have that issue. So you're looking at dealing with a certification that is unverifiable, and we take as a matter of commerce, not as a matter of inspection. The second thing is, if you care about the balance of trade, it's a big component. So again, buying local keeps money, and there's that old adage that every dollar you spend locally stays in the community 7 times. Every dollar you spend at Price Club goes back to headquarters and leaves the community. So really what you're doing is you're bleeding the community. I mean, it's seriously a bloodletting. And with that goes all of the amenities. I mean, since I've been here, I've looked at Middleburg. We lost our hardware store. We lost our grocery store. And what have we got now? We've got some foofy chain places to buy clothes that they think people in Middleburg wear. I watched my hometown. I watched it happen to South Lake Tahoe. I see it time and time again where it just in the rural communities, it just tears the guts out of them. And so the general rule is buy local. And we weren't organic when I was growing up, but we sure didn't feed our cows anything that we wouldn't eat. Our neighbors ate that food, and we weren't into poisoning our neighbors. We ate the food. We weren't into poisoning ourselves. We certainly weren't into poisoning our cows. So again, kind of, if you bring that back to a local thing, it kind of solves itself, because local then will be organic. I know a lot of people who are growing animals and they're not organic, but they're also not putting horrible stuff, except for usually Roundup, which is another topic. They're not really putting too much horrible stuff, and they're certainly not engaging in feedlot concentrated feeding practices. So the usual mantra is local and then organic. I'm hoping that soon we won't have to make that horrible religious choice, because that's really what it comes down to. Well, thank you very much.